go.
Okay, folks, I'm Mike Hannawalt from the RCPA Conference Committee. I'm just going to give folks a couple seconds here to load in. So just be patient and then we'll get started. Okay, I'm Mike Hannawalt. I'm from the RCPA Conference Committee. I welcome you to the conference. Hope you're having an enjoyable virtual experience. Just a couple reminders before we get started. We are asking that you use the Q&A function, not the chat function, to communicate out to our presenter. Our presenter will be answering questions towards the end of the presentation, but feel free to put those questions in as you think of them. Again, use the Q&A function, not the chat function. Our workshop evaluations are available on the agenda. If you scroll down, you'll see where it says evaluate, along with any handouts that have been provided by the presenter. Please complete that workshop evaluation. It is great to have that feedback, not only for the RCPA Conference Committee in terms of our planning for next year, but also to give that feedback to our presenters. And as you know, when you finish our conference experience, there is an overall conference evaluation. Again, that's in the app called Conference Eval. Please take a minute to fill that out, and I've heard there's a wonderful prize attached to selected from that evaluation. CE electronic verification form is on the RCPA conference website. You can go on there, fill out your CE workshop numbers as you're participating in the conference, and you're going to email that to Sarah Esther. As you know, we have some on-demand topics that are available for you. Those are also available for CEs, and those are all good through October 8th when that form is due back to Sarah Esther. So you are in P7, leading through the life cycle of a crisis. And I turn it over to our presenter. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike, and good afternoon, everybody. I'm Toni Pergolin. I'm the president and CEO of Bancroft, and it's really a pleasure to be with you today. I too hope that you are really enjoying this conference. I had an opportunity to jump into some of the sessions earlier today, and I found them extremely relevant to the world we're operating in today. And for sure, I hope that my presentation you'll find relevant to what we are all experiencing as well. As you can see, it's titled Leading Through the Life Cycle of a Crisis. Now, I am a firm believer that as leaders, and whether you're at the top of your organization or at some level in between, we're all leaders, and the people that we serve, their families, and our staff really look to us as their leaders to successfully manage through any crisis that we encounter. And we'll spend a few minutes talking about the different types of crises. But as leaders, it's our responsibility to not only lead the organization through it, but also to do it successfully. And I'm sure you would agree. And you know, I chose this title because as we go through crises, it really is a cycle, right? And what you're doing in the beginning of a crisis and what you're doing midway through and what you're doing towards the end are all different as leaders. And so I thought it would be helpful to really walk through some of the crises that I've led this organization through. And of course, spend most of our time today talking about the current crisis that we're all leading through and hopefully successfully, the pandemic. I find it really important as we lead through crises that we really take time to reflect, look back, learn from it. What did we do that went well? What did we do that we should really think about? Incorporating some changes in, because we all know that there will be another crisis not far down the lane. So really just a helpful exercise to reflect, think about what you did really well, and be prepared for things where you had opportunities. And so again, hopefully you'll learn some of those reflections that I had as we go through this presentation today. see if I can go through my slide here. Okay, there we go. All right, I'm having a problem here. Okay, let's see. Okay, there we go. Sorry about that. So today's discussion, I thought I would spend a little time talking to you about Bancroft, just so that you can put into context some of the things that I'll be describing. So I'll spend a little time talking about Bancroft. I also want to talk about the different types of crises that we as leaders may encounter. And I would also imagine that if you are a leader, you have or you will experience leading through some of these crises at some time in your career. So again, the more we know and the more we can share about our experiences, the better. Of course, I want to spend some time talking about the pandemic and why I think the crisis we're currently in is very different in many ways from the other types of crises we'll talk about. I'll really spend the most of my time today talking about key elements to surviving a crisis. And we'll, nothing that you've never heard of before, I'm sure, but just some key elements that I found helpful, and then how they changed as each phase of the cycle it occurred. And then, of course, we'll talk at the end about moving forward, because as we all know, this crisis is not over yet. And so I'll ask you to think about a few things and share some of the thoughts that I have. Let's try this again. Okay. So a little bit about Bancroft. So you can see it's a 137-year-old nonprofit organization. It was founded by our founder, Margaret Bancroft, in 1883. Margaret was a school teacher in Philadelphia, and as she was teaching her students, she realized that there was one student who was not learning at the same pace as some of the other students. But what she also realized is that if she changed her approach to teaching, if she used different tools, and she spent a little bit more time with that one student, she too could learn and grow like the rest of the students. And so it is with that first pupil that she started her school in Haddonfield, New Jersey, and really began delivering her new approach. That was 137 years ago. Today, we support and we serve individuals with autism, and autism, we have about 75% of our population is diagnosed with autism, intellectual and developmental disabilities, and brain injuries. And I put our mission statement here because as you lead through a crisis, I think it's very important that we always keep our mission in front of us. Always make sure that the decisions that we're making continue to empower us to implement our mission. So Bancroft's mission is to profoundly impact children and adults living with disabilities by delivering high quality services to empower them to realize their best life. And those last few words are the most important to me. Empower them to realize their best life. And again, we'll talk about that as it relates to the crisis. So a little bit more about Bancroft by the numbers. So you can see we have almost 3,000 dedicated staff members. We serve approximately 2,000 individuals on an annual basis. We do this primarily through our residential program. We have 250 group homes and supervised apartments. We have 17 facilities and 3 campuses. More than half of those facilities are our day programs, where we really work with the individuals to provide them skills to both live and learn and work as independently as possible. And then we have 3 schools. We have a variety of corporate offices, and we have 3 very large campuses where we serve the most acute individuals that we have. Our programs are primarily in New Jersey. We're one of the largest human service providers in New Jersey, and we also have programs in Pennsylvania and Delaware. And as we are in fiscal year 2021 here, our annual revenue is $200 million. So that's a little bit about the organization. And I thought I would also spend a few moments talking about what Bancroft looked like when I arrived in 2004. So I was recruited to Bancroft as their chief financial officer. I had worked for a large health system in Philadelphia for about 15 years, always in the finance operation roles, and had really learned quite a few times how to lead the organization that I was then with through a turnaround. But I was part of a team, and you really do learn a lot of tools. I would say that you have when you lead through a turnaround. So when I arrived, and I did know that they were in financial trouble, what I found when I sat down in my seat was they had a negative cash flow. Cash flow. So that was what was happening. We, in essence, did not have enough cash, and we posted a $13 million loss the first year I was here. Now, when I arrived, the first things I did, I would say for the first 3 months, was answer phone calls from our vendors, literally begging for some type of payment and threatening, if you will, to pull their services if they didn't get paid. So our utilities, our rents, our health benefits, right? All these vendors had not been paid. When you have negative cash flow, you don't have enough money for all this. So in the beginning, it was a real quick assessment of like, this organization is in trouble. And you can see in that second bullet point, very early on, we began bankruptcy proceedings. And we searched, at the same time, we searched for a merger partner, because we did recognize that we were so far in the hole at that point that in order to really keep the organization, the services going, that we may need a partner or to file for bankruptcy. So, of course, I speak to you today as the CEO of Bancroft because we did in fact turn it around. But what's important to learn about in this third bullet is that it took 2 years to stabilize the organization from a financial perspective. So when you post a $13 million loss, that doesn't happen overnight, right? So it doesn't turn around overnight. And that's really key when you think about a financial crisis, is that it takes time. But in order to have the time to turn it around, you have to have cash, right? Because payday comes every other Friday, whether you're ready or not. And so I was fortunate, Bancroft was fortunate really, to have a very generous donation from one of our board members. He was also a family member of Bancroft. And his generosity gave me cash flow in the form of very generous donations, and later on, some interest-free loans. And having access to cash really is what allowed me to be successful in implementing the turnaround. Now, there's a lot of hard decisions to make in a financial turnaround. We'll continue this conversation, but, we actually ended up, closing programs, doing outsourcing. I mean, really quick decisions that were really critical to our survival. So once we got through the turnaround, I was named CEO in 2006. And I really spent the next 10 years not only stabilizing the organization, but you can say I doubled the size. And it was important to really grow the organization, but it was important to grow it at the right pace, right? So once you come out of a huge turnaround like that, you can't just all of a sudden, double your revenue. I mean, the organization would not be prepared. And so it was a really slow, gradual, thoughtful growth in the organization. And we, both grew the revenue, our admissions, the number of individuals we serve, and at the same time, we really worked to increase our core competencies within the organization. And we'll talk a little bit more about that too. 12 years later, we went from being on the verge of bankruptcy to building a $75 million state-of-the-art campus for our children's program that opened 2.5 years ago now. And so, you see there at the bottom, 2 important to fail leadership lessons in nonprofits. So I wrote a book really about my journey I thought it was really, again, a helpful experience to share, especially for nonprofit organizations that we, often find ourselves in some type of financial crisis situation. So I share, my tactics. I shared my thinking, and I also shared, which I thought was probably the most impactful part of the book, is the story through our families, right? So what I learned pretty early on in my time here was that in talking to families, that they really depended so much on Bancroft, and where would their child be without Bancroft, and all that they were able to accomplish because of Bancroft. And so I learned that Bancroft really was too important to fail to so many people. And really being a strong leader and knowing how to come out of these crises successful was really not there was no other option but to do it successfully. So I'll have more information on my book at the end of the presentation. So let's keep going here. So let's talk about crises. And like I said, no matter how long you've been in your role, if you haven't experienced some of these yet, I promise you, you will. So let's talk a little bit more about a financial crisis overall. I think it's the most common, especially for nonprofit organizations. And, as much as I said, it took a long time for the organization, Bancroft, to be at a $13 million loss, 16 years ago. Sometimes a financial crisis can happen rather quickly, right? So you can think about your funding streams and how sometimes they change pretty quickly. For instance, we had a funder, one of our largest funder, that used to pay us, prepay us. So they would pay us on the last day of the month for the month ahead, the services. Well, then they decided to change that. They said, not only are we not going to prepay you, we're going to wait till the service is done, and we want you to bill us, and you're going to have to wait 2 weeks for the payment. So we went from having a very large payment at the end of every month to now having much smaller payments 6 weeks later. You don't see that coming, you will be in a negative cash flow position. So again, just important to know how these things can happen so that you can be prepared. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. Another thing that might happen is admissions, right? So there may be a reason that some of your funders stop admitting to you. That could cause a really quick financial crisis. Maybe you have some large one-time expenses, and we can talk about that in the current situation. I mean, how much money we're spending on PPE that we never did before. That might be a cause for implementing or causing a financial crisis. Now, I would tell you that when you're going through a financial crisis, different from some of these others, your key focus needs to be on cash. Cash, cash, and cash. Because you need cash to get through the crisis, to fix things up. So it's just important to know where you can draw cash from. So, and when I spoke about when I arrived at Bancroft, we did have lines of credit, but they were all maxed, right? We had no endowment. So those are some things that I started working on as soon as we came out of our financial crisis, right? I learned very quickly that I can't run out of cash again. So I needed to really build up our cash supply. I needed to make sure we had more adequate lines of credit, and we really needed to start to build the endowment so that we could never experience that level of negative cash flow again. The other thing that's important in a financial crisis, I would say, is you have to really understand your business model, right? And the impacts of any decisions you make on that business model. For instance, in one of our programs, it was a cost-based program. So if we cut positions, and that's typically the first thing you do when you're trying to stabilize a financial crisis, if you cut a position in a cost-based program, then your revenue drops, and so does your cash. So you have to really understand that, right? We had other programs, other funders that funded us dollars that if we didn't spend all their dollars, we had to pay them back. So here we are making cuts in programs, and now I'm ending up sending money back to the funder. So you really have to truly understand the impact of your business model so that when you're making decisions, you understand what it's going to do to the business model. You know, another thing that I would say is really important in a financial crisis is communication about where you are to your team. And you know, the organization, in my opinion, has to be aware, because the finance department is not the department that fixes the financial crisis, right? All the decisions about spending happen out in our programs. So if those directors, if those employees don't know that we're really struggling, they're not going to change their behavior. And so I spent a lot of time educating people about no margin, no mission, right? If we didn't have a margin, then we could not continue serving our mission, right? Our mission to help these individuals live their best life. And so, you know, it was eye-opening to me just how many people worked in a nonprofit organization and truly believed that we weren't allowed to make a profit. Now, as hopefully we all know, that all the nonprofit title means is that we don't pay taxes and we're allowed to raise money, right? Get donations. Other than that, we operate exactly like every other for-profit organization. And, you know, the education around that was, you know, well, what are we going to do with that money? Well, that money that we make, our profit, is what we use to invest back into the organization. And that is how we, when I talked about that 10-year growth spurt, little by little, we would take the money we earned and we would invest it back in the organization. We would invest in our technology systems. We would invest in our human capital processes. We would invest in communications, right? So you can't do it all at once, but you have to really build the core foundation of your organization, simply because that's how you prepare yourself really the best for the next crisis, whatever comes down the line. And, you know, and also I would say in a financial crisis, you have to be courageous, because you have to make some really tough decisions. You may have to close programs. You may have to lay people off. You may need to outsource. So I outsourced the billing and collection problems department when I first arrived, because that was why we were not collecting cash, is because we were not billing it appropriately. So financial crises, I do think are the most common, and hopefully they're not all as huge and as impactful as when I arrived at Bancroft, but they do happen over time, and it's just good to be aware of it and to see it coming and to be thoughtful about your decisions. Okay, let's move on. Let's talk about the reputational crisis. So this one can take many different angles. I would say that perhaps if an incident happens in your organization, or a key personnel is, you know, alleged to have done something wrong, right? When you have a reputational crisis, the issue is that the people in the community, your stakeholders, no longer trust you. So different from the financial crisis where you got to focus on cash, in a reputational crisis, you need to focus on building trust in your organization again, right? Building trust. So how do we do that? Well, the first thing I would say is you may need to engage a third party, an outside objective, if you will, group of individuals that can provide an assessment for your organization. And so whatever the issue was, the incident, the personnel, you need somebody to come in and assess your processes and procedures. And why I think it's so important that you get an outside person is because if you're just doing it yourself and saying, you know what, we checked it and we're all good, that doesn't build trust, right? So remember, we're focusing on building trust. And so third-party audit of processes and procedures is one thing. For sure, you'll need to retrain in your organization, and people need to see that and know it, that you're taking this serious enough that you need to retrain people again on the processes and procedures around the incident. root cause analysis. And again, a lot of these processes and items I'm talking about, not only are they good because they will really enlighten you on any areas that need improving in your organization, but it's really healthy, I would say, that your staff and that your stakeholders see that you're taking this reputation crisis serious enough that you're going to engage, you're going to make an investment, and you're really going to change the way that you had been operating. And then lastly, I would say, you need to flood the community with all the good stories, right? And I know we can all relate to this. There's so much good that happens in our organizations every single hour of every single day, but none of those make the front page of the paper, do they? No, they don't. They look for the one thing that went bad. Well, I would say that, really flood social media, flood your emails, flood your stakeholders with all the good stories as well. So reputation is around building trust and back into your organization. Let's go on to natural disaster. I'm sure there's a couple things that are going through your minds when you see that slide. For me, it was Hurricane Sandy. And when Hurricane Sandy hit in New Jersey a few years back now, it was devastating to our programs. We had trees down. Of course, power was out for literally weeks. And, we had 70 children relocate to hotels, to local hotels. So you can try to imagine 70 children with autism and developmental disabilities in a hotel-like setting with our staff. I mean, it was quite disruptive. More for the staff, of course, than for the individuals we serve who thought they were on vacation. But it was really devastating to the organization. And, I would say as the leader, I felt pretty helpless. Like there wasn't a lot that I could do to fix the situation. You really felt helpless. But there was two things that again, as I reflect, I would say were the most helpful through this crisis was being present. So staff just needed to see that I was there. I was checking in on them to support them. What did they need? I brought them food, right? I mean, I showed up. People just needed to see that I understood what they were going through, and they were recognized for it, right? We were very focused on recognizing just above and beyond what our staff did to get us through this disaster. And the second thing I would say I did was you can't be afraid to ask for help. And so I really did. We asked board members, we asked our legislators to see if they could get our organization to the top of the list for turning on power. And, I knew that there was a lot of people out there asking, but I needed to be the voice for my organization. So, natural disasters take a life of their own. Sometimes you are helpless with it. And I would say that most important as a leader is to be seen and to recognize what your staff are doing through the natural disaster, and then don't be afraid to ask. And then finally, we'll talk about cybersecurity. Right, so this is probably the newest one on my little slide here, taking, again, a lot of different angles on how this may impact you. For us, for instance, it could be a HIPAA breach. And probably the most common cybersecurity issues we're dealing with, perhaps you are too, are these phishing emails, right? So an email comes to one of my staff members. It looks like it comes from Tony Pergolin, their CEO. And the email says, please wire $30,000 to this account. Well, why wouldn't they? If the CEO is asking for it. Well, and it's scary, right? And it's crazy that they know how to do this. But it's important because it could really be devastating for your organization in a variety of ways. The HIPAA breach, letting out information that they shouldn't. And then again, the phishing. And so what we've done as an organization is really, this is all about communication and training your staff to be aware of these types of emails and of issues and really what could happen. And our IT department does a lot of tests, if you will, So you'll get an email every couple days or, every so often from Amazon saying, hit this link. And when you hit the link, it says you should not have opened this. This was a test and you failed, right? So it's really, how do you really help your staff and your stakeholders be much more aware of their actions and how they can perhaps overcome some of these cyber scans. So educate your staff about it. Have backup plans in place so that if it does happen, you are prepared. And and this I thought was interesting too. I mean, this cybersecurity is a pretty high tech, right, type issue. So if you only have one person that knows how to get through this, I would suggest that you should have a second person as well, right? So this is not going away and perhaps only going to grow over time. So again, all different kinds of crises, but for sure as leaders, all different things to think about in successfully, which I think is key there, leading your organization through it. All right, so with that, why don't we talk about this pandemic? To me, this is unlike any other crisis I've had the experience of leading the organization through. And here's why. Number one, there's no playbook for this, right? None of us have ever had experience with this. There's nothing we can reflect on. This is something that we're all learning day by day in many cases. So no playbook. And I'll tell you on the crises on the prior slide, if you Google financial crisis, it'll tell you how to do it, right? It'll tell you some things to look at. Not so much for this COVID-19 crisis. Again, I'm sure you'd agree. Something else about this crisis is different, is there's no end date. So the hurricane, for example, hurricane comes and it's gone, and then you're in cleanup mode, right? A financial crisis comes and then you're able to build up cash and it's gone. This one, we really sit here today, 6-7 months later, having no idea when this is going to end. And that, to me, and we'll talk about this in some of the cycles, is the hardest piece, because you're making decisions without knowing what's going to happen in the next month. Here's something else different about this crisis. It impacts all your stakeholders differently. So in a financial crisis, right, it's a work issue. You come to work, you may be stressed at work, you got to get through this, and then you go home to your personal life. You're not having a financial crisis in your personal life. In the pandemic, you are, right? So they come to work, our individuals, our staff, and I'm sure so many of yours, are coming in, really stepping up, working with these individuals we serve, working on the masks and working on the temperatures, right? All those types of things. And then they got to go home and deal with it there too, right? They might have childcare issues. They might have some medical issues of people who live with them. So this crisis, very different from others, right? We're seeing that we have to be very understanding about how this crisis is impacting each of our staff members personally, our families personally. Another difference is that there's a lot of decisions that are being made that are out of our control, right? So in our state, for instance, the stay-at-home orders, they come, they go, they come again, they go again. We don't know that this is coming. We have to be reactive to it, right? They want programs closed, then they want them open, right? So there's a lot of things that are out of our control, which makes it a little bit more difficult. And then the last one, and I'll wonder if you agree with this, I think a hard part of this crisis is that there's not one person in charge. Here's what I mean by that. If you think about it, where are you getting your guidance from? Is it from the CDC, which, by the way, changes their guidance pretty often? Is it Dr. Fauci? Is it your governor? Is it your funder? Right? And so I guess what I'm saying is there's no one person in charge. And so there's a little bit of chaos going on. What we can do in New Jersey, we can't do in Pennsylvania. What we can do in Delaware, we can't do in New Jersey. It's very difficult to really manage a crisis when there's no one one voice in how to move this forward. And we'll talk about the importance of that. So for me, leading through this crisis has been different in many ways. And my priorities have changed as we cycle through each phase, and will continue to do so. So let's talk about the keys to survival. And you'll see, I believe that this is something we need to think about through every phase we're in, every cycle we're in. Prepare, prepare, prepare. Now, this preparation that I'm speaking about, you can't prepare for a crisis when the crisis hits. I'm sure you would all agree, right? So a lot of the preparing is well before the crisis. And that's why I said at the beginning that you should always reflect on what worked and what didn't work. So when the next one comes, you have some time to really heighten the focus on the areas that perhaps didn't do well. So for me, as I mentioned, our IT department was really fabulous in helping us, and I'll talk a little bit about this on a couple more slides, really helping us build dashboards to be able to really see and prevent a lot of the COVID, sorry, impacting us, right? Well, so you can't, on the day it happens, say, you know what, why don't we invest in IT today so that we can have great dashboards, right? So those are the types of things that you have to constantly be building into your organization. If you think about it, we're watching all these businesses around us, not make it. And who were the first ones to go? The ones that were already on shaky ground, right? Not really strong in some of their core competencies. Those were the first ones gone, right? So when you're not in crisis mode, you need to be very focused on investing in some of your core foundation competencies, departments, structures in your organization. So you're prepared for the next crisis. So I would say IT was critical in us getting through this. Our communications department, and we've really built it up over the past few years, was critical. We'll talk about communication and how when you're going through a crisis, it's so key. And how about infection control? I mean, this group of nurses that we had in infection control, I'm telling you, shined through this, right? And I mean, it wasn't like we put that together overnight either. So it really is helpful to be thinking about areas that you may need to invest in or really build up as you go through this crisis. The second thing is act quickly. And I'm sure you agree with this. When you're in a crisis, you do not have time to evaluate all your options, to get input from everybody. I mean, you're in a crisis mode. You need to act quickly. And I'll go through some of those quick decisions that I made. And then future planning. No matter what phase you're in, you need to be already thinking about what could happen in the next phase and going back to prepare. So we'll kind of walk through each of these in the different cycles. First, I want to start with a quote, and I have a couple of these quotes in here that really resonated with me as I was leading through this crisis, right? So you got to start by doing what's necessary. Then all of a sudden you start doing what's possible, and then suddenly you're doing the impossible. And I bet you if you think back to the very first day when this was all unveiling, you just started acting, right? And then pretty soon it was starting to get better. And all of a sudden, you can look back, hopefully like we are today, feeling very proud of how our organization is faring through this. So let's go to day one. So I wonder if you can remember where you were when you realized this was bigger than we thought, right? So in that November, December mode, we heard about it in China and, oh my goodness, did you hear what's going on over there? Like, wow, that's crazy. And then you just keep going on with your life, right? So day one for me was a Friday, early March, and I was in Key West getting ready to attend a wedding of a friend of mine. And I got a text from my chief clinical officer and said, I just want to let you know that I'm going to send a communication out to our directors that we're going to go in lockdown mode this weekend. I don't want any of our individuals out in the community because of the virus. And I was like, wow. I was a little unprepared for that. Like it just seemed to be so far away. And then right now, then all of a sudden it was it was in my organization. So I came back on Monday and I started preparing. And I would tell you, I was nervous about three things. Number one, cash, right? Once you go through a financial crisis, cash is always at the top of your list. And, I was worried about cash because there was so much unknown, right? We didn't know were our funders going to be okay? Or how were they going to be impacted? How about the banks? And, with all those people working remotely, you thought, are they going to still have access to fund us, right? So the first thing we did was we prepared for worst case on a cash perspective, and we brought in all of our lines of credit so that we had cash just in case. The other thing I was nervous about was that all of the individuals we serve would get the virus. And like, oh my God, like how would we manage that? And so we went into aggressive mode of buying the PPE, the protective personal equipment. So I wonder if you share some of these stories. In the beginning, again, it was such an unknown. People would walk in my office and say, I found a guy and he's got equipment in the back of his truck. Back of his trunk, can we go buy it? It was like, yes, please do. I mean, it was like bootleg, right? Like, oh my gosh, we were so nervous about just getting PPE any way we can. And then the third thing I was very worried about was staffing, right? So we have 3,000 staff, and if this virus was really going to come through and wipe out our staff, how could we continue to provide our service, right? How do we come back to that mission? How do we make sure that we're serving high quality services to help these individuals live their best life if we have no staff? And so for here, what we began to do pretty quickly was to start separating, some of the staff and, not allowing them to go into more than one program. So taking early precautions. And then we also reached out to some of the temp agencies to really put them on notice. So, prepare, especially on day one, so much unknown, we prepared for the worst case. And I think that's the best approach. Now, I'm happy to say none of those things happened. We did not run out of cash. We did not have a huge virus infection through the individuals we serve or our staff, but we were prepared. Act quickly. One of the first things I did was appointed a leader. And, for me, I looked in my toolbox, and as I mentioned, I'm a CFO by trade, so I got all kinds of financial tools. I've got calculators, and I've got Excel sheets, and I've got business models, and all those things, right? I had nothing in there that said, here's how to keep a virus out of your organization. But as leaders, we all have a second toolbox. That's our team. And so I looked in my second toolbox and saw that my chief clinical officer has a toolbox just for this. And that's where this infection control department really really stepped up. So I appointed my chief clinical officer as a leader. Now, as I mentioned before, that part of the pandemic, I think the problem is that we don't have one leader. I thought it was critical for an organization that has one leader. There's one voice. When people had questions, they all went to her. So they all got the same answer. And when you're leading through a crisis, there needs to be one point person so that all the decisions are consistent, all the messaging is consistent, and there's one person who's in charge. And I would tell you, it doesn't have to be you every time, right? I didn't have that experience. It didn't need to be me. I was happily to appoint the most skilled leader to get us through this. Now, it doesn't mean I went back in my office and put my feet up on the table saying, she got this, right? My job was to support her, and I needed people to see I supported her. So we had daily calls. I'm sure you did too. We have 30 people on these calls, and I was on that call every day so that people could see that this was my priority too. So really important that you appoint a leader, that everybody knows that that's the leader, and that they see that you are supporting that leader. So there were two things that I focused on when this first hit. And it was first and foremost keeping the individuals and our staff safe. The second one was keeping the business running. And here's why. When you go through a crisis, you can't say, you know what, let's put everything on hold so we can put all of our focus on the crisis. It doesn't work like that. And we're seeing that, right, in some companies around us, right? And not that they had choices, but, you know, a lot of these restaurants had to stop really doing their business. And now we know that many of them aren't going to come back. Well, that was going to happen to us too. And so that was really my focus. While my chief clinical officer focused on the health and safety of the individuals and staff, I focused on keeping the business running. And here's what I mean by that. You have to know what are the key components to keep your business running, right? For us, it was recruitment. I mean, we hire over 1,000 staff a year. I mean, we can't take 3-6 months off. We would never catch up. So really worked with our HR department and our recruiting function to keep recruiting going, right? Virtual, and then we had to bring them for training, and we had to do the 6 feet apart, and we really had to pivot, but we had to keep recruiting because that was critical to our business. The second thing was admissions, right? So we have to keep revenue coming into the organization. So we worked with a lot of our funders to say, look, please keep admitting. We'll isolate, right? We'll put each of these in quarantine, each of our new admissions in quarantine for 2 weeks until we put the next one in. So you really have to focus on what keeps your business running. And, you know, even some major projects for us, it was budget season. You can't just say, I'm not going to do a budget because we're in a crisis right now, right? So it was really being able to balance managing that crisis as well as keeping your business running. And, you know, I listed there some of our very early decisions around process and procedures that we had to implement quickly. So wellness checks, right? Again, everybody thermometers, teaching everybody how to use the thermometers, making sure that people were documenting that they were using it. Our program closures, right? How were we going to do that? Where were they going to go? How is that all going to be managed? Visitation. I mean, it was really heartbreaking then when we had to close visitation, right, to all of our families. So we put a lot of processes and procedures around that. And of course, the remote work. So, you know, this was a big deal to us, you know, because of course, most of the individuals that work here can't work remote, right? When you're a direct care, you have to come in. But there were some of us in the corporate office who could work remotely. And, you know, we had never done that before, even though it has been, you know, requested. I've always been a big believer that the corporate staff need to be here to support our direct care. But this was, you know, this was a different situation. And so, you know, we had to put some processes in place pretty quickly. So while we're doing all this on day one, we prepared for the worst case, we acted quickly, but we're already thinking about the next phase, right? So these were, I think, the key departments that were high priority, right? So infection control, and how were they getting all this PPE out, and how were they, you know, really supporting our programs? Communication was critical. I mean, we had a daily communication to our staff. It was one voice, one place that they could go for all their information they needed, and for questions that they had. Our IT, as I mentioned, they put together these fabulous dashboards, which I'll talk about in a few slides, as well as facilities, right? So they were the cleaning, right, folks? So all of those people really had to gear up because we needed them as we moved into this next phase. So let's go to another quote here. The struggle you are in today, which is really what I felt like in those first few days, was developing the strength we needed for tomorrow. The struggle you're in today is developing the strength you need tomorrow. So, you know, embrace the struggle because you're developing strength. Okay, so this next phase, you know, I put the 3-month period, April to June, right? So those last 2 weeks of March, everything was quick, and now it's April, and in our prepared bucket, you see that it was, for us, beginning of April, we had our first case. Now, we had prepared. We had all these processes and procedures. And when we had our first case, it was like everybody panicked, right? And staff were like, oh, I don't want to work with them. And I mean, it was this chaos. And we just pulled everybody together and said, we have processes, procedures, we know exactly how we're going to distribute the PPE, we know exactly what we're going to do here, and pulling everybody together and moving forward was really how we got through. And, every program, the first case of a staff member had it or a person served, it was, a little bit rocky, and then everybody figured out how to make it work. So dashboards, I referred to these a few times now. So we had these, and to me, I think that these dashboards were really part of how we were able to manage a low incident rate, which I'm very pleased about in the organization. But we had these dashboards that would show us every person served had their temperature taking in the morning and in the afternoon, and it was registered in our electronic health record. And we were able to produce dashboards. So if somebody had a temperature of 99 or more, we saw it. We saw it happen before it could get really bad. And so as soon as somebody spiked to 99, we sent facilities out there to do the cleaning. We distributed PPE so that if there was a case, we were able to control it to just 1 or 2 people. And again, it was because we had these dashboards that help us see ahead. Use of PPE, we really took a hard look at this. Once we got it off of everybody's trunks, we really looked at, our campus setting. So, I mentioned earlier that Bank had 3 campuses. We gave it to all the campus staff because we knew that if they got into one of our campuses, it would really be contagious. So we were very thoughtful of that. We really spent a lot of time about how to make sure we were being productive in our remote work, and some people were better than for others, for sure. And for the most part, I think we started out really strong with it, and I think a lot of that was because we were very clear on expectations. And then, of course, I can't emphasize enough the importance of a communication plan when you're going through any crisis. As far as acting quickly, what I would say here is, very quickly we went to virtual meetings. And, I was one of them. I wasn't a big fan, and I wanted to be in the conference room 6 feet apart with a couple of us, but quickly saw that really was not a productive way to meet with people. And these virtual meetings, really are much better than we anticipated. And, we get a lot more participation and a lot more focus. Fundraising. So fundraising, always important to, especially a nonprofit organization. And when you go into a crisis, sometimes it's hard to fundraise, right? Because I remember when I was in the financial crisis, how do you ask people for money when you barely have any? In this one specifically, we know that a lot of organizations like us made the decision to not fundraise during this crisis because they said, people are dealing with enough, let's not bother them. Well, our chief development officer took a whole different approach. She said, you know what, people are feeling helpless around this. They want to help. Let's give them an easy way to help us. And so pretty quickly, she established the emergency fund that we use for PPE, that we use to really, buy these thermometers and all this equipment that we had. And I was amazed. We raised over $400,000 in this 3-month period, and we got so many new donors. Again, I think people were just really looking forward to trying to help in some way. The other thing we did is we have an annual butterfly ball. It's our biggest fundraiser. It's in April every year. And, as we got into April, she was really pushing, I want to do it anyway. And of course, the decision was taken out of our hands when they closed all the indoor. And so we did the virtual butterfly ball, and perhaps many of you tried that as well. Again, I wasn't a big fan, but as it happened, it worked out splendidly. And we ended up actually netting more money than we did last year when we held it in person because we didn't have all the expenses. So, I guess my message around fundraising is don't stop. I mean, when you're in a crisis, people really want to help. And I would urge you to continue. Ask for help, as I mentioned earlier. The families, our community, they wanted to help. I mean, we got thousands of masks made for us. We've got tons of games and arts and crafts and all those types of things to keep the individuals we serve occupied in their group homes. So don't be afraid to ask. And then, by June, here we were now future planning, thinking about the next phase. And, They were talking about lifting the stay-at-home orders. So we had to start planning for that. They wanted, our funder said we want parents to be back visiting again. We had to be prepared for that. We wanted to offer return to office. If you're ready to come back, we wanted to be ready for that. And that the other thing was, we're 3 months in now. In the beginning, everybody was engaged and, like, oh, come on, this is a new thing. Let's try this. At the end of the 3 months, there was a growing fatigue, right? Growing fatigue around working from home, growing fatigue around the mask wearing, growing fatigue about not going to school, growing fatigue around, not being out of your house. I mean, we're all feeling it, right? So, so we had to really plan for all of that as well. Okay, one more quote here. Progress is rarely a straight line. There's always bumps in the road, but you can make the choice to keep looking ahead. And I have to say this one really resonated with me because there are bumps in this road, right? And it's exhausting at times, but you have to keep looking ahead. We're leaders. People are looking to us to keep leading and getting through this crisis successful. So we need to make the choice to keep looking ahead. All right, so July to September, right? So these last 3 months has been a whole different shift for us based on the early months. You can see in the prepare there, I put focus on the mission. And this was really interesting to me because from an operation perspective, we actually did okay, right? So our funders really stepped up and really supported us through this so that we could, continue to support the individuals we serve in our house and in their group homes. So that was great. We also saw things like our emergency room visits decreased, right? Our vehicle expense decreased because nobody's out and about. 911 calls, employee injuries, all these things that it seems like we're always working on, right? We always want to reduce these things. They just all reduce on their own because we were not, out and about. And so as much as it was good operationally, what it really struck me was we were not implementing our mission, right? Our individuals were not living their best lives. We were not delivering high quality services because we could not get them out. And so we really shifted from the crisis mode to more of a management mode. And we shifted and focused on our mission. So helping the individuals we serve wear masks, helping them get out and outside activities. We really focus on getting their families back. We really had to focus on our mission. So it was interesting because in the financial crisis, you have no margin, no mission. In this one, we had no mission, but we had a healthy margin. So really had to really see that in the organization, show that we could shift. Started opening for visitation, mass individuals, and then return to office. So we did prepare our offices in the summertime. It was voluntary, but for people who were ready to come back, we really supported that. Acting quickly. So we went from day-to-day calls to weekly calls. We still have them today. We spent a lot of time on recognizing the individual or our staff for really amazing work they did. We had parades for them, and we bought them shirts, and we sent them chairs, and we sent them food, right? Really had to focus on recognition. I think this is important, just like I talked about in the hurricane. And we had to shift work priorities. You had to really think about what you were doing. I mean, as a CEO of an organization like this, I was typically out and about. I would have breakfast meetings and lunch meetings and events at night and constantly running meeting. And all of a sudden that stopped. I'm just here. I don't go out in the evenings anymore. I don't go out for, and so I had to really think about, okay, what's the best way to use my time and really shift our work priorities. And so as we end this this month, this phase, I'm thinking about, what are we preparing for next? And some things on my mind are the economic impact, right? So, in New Jersey, for instance, they pushed the budget back. So instead of starting on July 1, it starts October 1. Well, that'll impact us for sure. right? And what about, if people are not out spending their money, there's not as much tax revenue. In New Jersey, the casinos really spending really helped the state earn revenue. Those casinos were closed for 3 months. Very few people are out there. So all of that economic impact, how is that going to impact my organization? Really thinking about that. Future funding impact. We were fortunate. Our funders really stepped up, and they actually, in addition to funding us to be able to serve the individuals in our group homes, they also passed on hazard pay for our staff. Wonderful, wonderful things, right? But where did that money come from, right? It came from somewhere. So my concern is, are they going to have to start cutting as we move forward? So I'm preparing for that. What if we don't get a vaccine? I think we as leaders, we really need to be thinking about that. What kind of impact will that have on our programs, on our staffing, on the individuals we serve, their health and wellness? You need to be thinking about that now. And potential growth opportunities, right? You have to add that in there too. There may be some smaller organizations that are going to need partners. And so, we're looking at, how do we make sure we get through this phase strong, and where may there be opportunities for us? So just in summary, prepare. And again, very, very important to prepare before the crisis occurs. You can't wait for the crisis to say, oh my goodness, we got to get ready for this. And I would say, really focus on building the infrastructure of your organization. To me, one of the reasons that we continued strong through this crisis is because our core competencies in our departments were strong and we're able to get through this. And you have to prepare for worst case. I mean, you really do. And for sure, I can't talk enough about the importance of having cash. Acting quickly, again, in summary, I think you need to assign a leader there first and foremost, so that everybody knows who's calling the shots and everybody knows where to ask their questions, so that you have consistent messaging and consistent processes. You have to institute regular check-in command centers. I'm sure you all did this. I mean, it was one way to bring us all together every day, so we all knew what was happening, right? Anytime in a crisis. Articulate priorities. I had to say to the group, we need to keep everybody healthy and safe, and we need to keep the business running. That's it right now, right? So you have to really think about how important that is for your team to hear. And then, of course, communicate. And, future planning, what is next, both in the short term, right? So what's the next 3 months going to look like? How could that impact us? And what about the long term? What if it really, what if we're in this state for another year, right? I remember they were saying that when this first happened, and I couldn't even think about that, yet there were. So I just leave you with some questions here to consider as you kind of think about these points that I made today. Are you prepared for your worst case scenario? Do you know what your worst case scenario is? Right? Do you know what you should be preparing for? Do you know who your leader is through this crisis? Is there one person? Even if it's not you, is there one person? And does everybody on your team know who that one person is? What key components of your infrastructure should you invest more in? Right, so I really encourage you to be reflective. Think about these past 6 months. Think about, where the strength in your organization is. And think about some of the weak areas. How effective is your communication plan? If you reached out to your staff today, would they say they were informed through this whole thing? Do they know how you're thinking about it? Do they know what the priorities are? Do they know what the new processes and procedures are? And how will your organization be impacted if there's no vaccine? What is that going to look like? What's that going to look like in our personal lives? What's that going to look like in your organization? And, how will your organization sustain a funding reduction if that's where this goes? Right? I mean, there's no way that this country is going to come out of this crisis without some impact in the economy. And if the economy is impacted so strongly, that absolutely, in my opinion, will cascade down to us through our funding. And how will we manage that? And my last quote, which of course is my favorite, is never, never, never give up, from Winston Churchill. We are leaders. We can never give up because, in my opinion, we are all too important to fail. So that's all I have for you today. Let's see if I can check to see if there's any questions that came up. Let's see, I think I have a few minutes here, Mike, so maybe I'll take one of these. How have some of these lessons changed you and your organization? So good question. I'll ask you to think about that as well, right? Are there some things you're doing now that you would never thought of before that now you're like, you know what, maybe we will do this? You know, we talked about virtual meetings for sure. I don't think I'd want to do all my meetings virtual in the future, but for sure, you know, we have programs that are really quite far, and to be able to, you know, really be able to meet in a much more efficient way, I think is something that we'll do, you know, when appropriate. We instituted telehealth. I didn't really speak about that. Maybe some of you have done that as well. Very, very effective tool for us. We absolutely will continue to do that. What else? You know, working remote, you know, as I said, I was never a real big fan of that. But I saw that it was productive, and I saw that some of our staff, you know, it is something that I think is worth thinking about further. And we most likely will bring everybody back, but allow them to take a day or two a week remote if that works for their areas. So I think that there are some things that we've learned through this crisis, through this time period, that we'll continue to institute. Let's see. Here's a good one. If you knew it was going to be a 6-month plus crisis, would you have done anything differently? Another good one for you all to think about as well. When I go back and I think about what, you know, what I would have done differently, you know, I think I would still keep to my prepare, act quickly, and think about the next phase, right? So I didn't go into this thinking it was 6 months, but I did go into this knowing that it was going to evolve. And so I think being prepared for evolution is the best way to kind of move forward. Here's another question. How did you motivate and maintain direct support staff during the crisis? Great question. And I, you know, it was hard because they really did step up and did so much. You know, I mentioned a few things. You know, we did the drive-by parades. We got them all T-shirts. We got them all, you know, chairs, and those folding chairs. We were often bringing them food. You know, we got a lot of support from our families and our community. They give them activities. I think that was really helpful for them. You know, I also mentioned we were very fortunate to have our funders really pass through the hazard pay, because, you know, there's really nothing more motivational to our staff than to get more money. So but it was difficult. But you know, we had social media around them. I mean, we were constantly focused on them, and you know, we did a lot of virtual dance parties and things like that. And I'm telling you, these people are very, very creative. Another question: what was your board's role during this pandemic? Great question. You know, the board for us, I mean, we were a very strong board. They were very, of course, concerned. They were very much in touch. And, you know, what was helpful for me is, you know, of course, we did all of our meetings virtually and still do. It was really helpful for me to hear what their companies were doing, right? Because, again, this was something that had never done before. So, it was really helpful for me to have them share, what they were doing with remote work, how they were keeping people motivated, how they were, often supporting their staff. So I would say probably the thing they did the most was really provide, thoughtful guidance around other things that they're doing. They were very supportive in our emergency fundraising, very supportive in our virtual ball. So our board was very supportive and really always checking in to see what they could do. Here's another question. I found a lot of support from other nonprofit leaders with weekly Zoom meetings. Did that occur for you? No, I would say no, but again, just like how I use the board, I would find that very, very helpful. Again, just so that we're sharing how we're getting through this, right? Because it was so different than every other crisis that we did. So I think that's all the questions that popped up. I think, Mike, you wanted a few minutes at the end. So I really want to just thank everybody for your time and attention today. I hope you found some valuable nuggets to really be reflective on the success you're leading your organization through. So thank you very much.
Tony, on behalf of the RCPA Conference Committee, we thank you and so much appreciate your topic, certainly is timely in terms of what's going on in our world right now. So thank you for being part of our conference and sharing your experience and your journey with us. We so appreciate that.
Thank you.
Just a quick reminder, please evaluate this session. You'll find that in the agenda section. Scroll down and there is a button to evaluate. And as I said earlier, we're also asking you to evaluate the entire conference at the end of the conference through the evaluation tab. You're going to actually go back into the master of ceremonies. We have a short transition period here. Our next set of presentations begin at 4:15. And before I wrap us up, Tony, there was a question, and I took a look on the information that we have from you. If your slides could be made available, if you would like to do that, if you could email those to Sarah, she'll be sure to add those in so folks can have access to them if you'd like folks to have.
Absolutely. I absolutely. And, and the last slide, I'll ask you all to look at it when I send it around, is the Amazon link for my book, Too Important to Fail, for some more, thoughts on leading through crises. So thank you, Mike. I'm happy to do that.
Thank you so much. Okay, folks, we'll see you over in the Master of Ceremonies, and then we'll see you again at 4:15 for our last set of sessions before we do our closing ceremonies with Richard. Alrighty, thanks so much.